delay, won't there?
There's going to be a bit of.
Yeah. It's 4 o'clock. All right, everybody, welcome to our very first live webinar. A big welcome to everyone who's joining in and watching on our YouTube channel for SV Animal Health. It's really good to have you here. Please pardon the giant nose in the background. This is our buddy who's joining us for this webinar. So I'm Dr. Hannah, and I work in the Scientific Communications Department at SV Animal Health. And we are delighted to welcome Dr. Katrin, we know her very well, to give us this webinar on building blocks for canine behaviour. And it's really covering everything in emotional development with a particular emphasis on a lot of the charities that we work with and encouraging people when they're looking to foster or adopt and how to introduce a new family member into their home. So when we are doing the webinar, there will be the option on the YouTube channel to leave a comment or a question, and we will leave time at the end for a Q&A session. So please leave any questions that you would like us to answer at any point during the webinar. And then at the end, once Dr. Katrin has finished speaking, I will read out any of the questions, and then we can have a Q&A session that goes on for a little while then. And if we run out of time, we will also collect all those questions, and we will make sure that we post the answers from Dr. Katrin on our social media. So a brief introduction for Dr. Katrin. She is the founder and owner of the German Veterinary Clinic in Abu Dhabi. And before settling in the UAE, Dr. Katrin worked in both general and referral practice in the UK, where she received the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons Certificate in Veterinary Anaesthesia and Pain Relief, as well as completing a doctorate thesis in animal behaviour. Dr. Katrin is currently in the midst of a 4-year residency in veterinary behaviour medicine. And the German Veterinary Clinic is the first ISFM gold standard cat-friendly clinic in the Middle East, as well as the first clinic in the region to be enrolled in the Fear-Free certification program. And hopefully, of course, many of you will also recognize Dr. Katrin as she regularly takes part in our Pets and Vets segment on Dubai Eye, where she offers advice and practical support and tips on all aspects of pet care. So I will hand over to her now, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for the lovely introduction, and good afternoon to everybody that's listening. So I'd like to take the opportunity to first of all thank SV Group for organising the webinar today, and I'd also like to thank Royal Canin for sponsoring today's webinar and making it all possible. So I've titled this webinar Building Blocks of Canine Behaviour, because of course we could talk for days about canine behaviour, certainly for hours. But what I really wanted to kind of give you in this next hour is a foundation of canine behaviour. So some of the foundational aspects that I think are really important when it comes to canine behaviour. And what I'd like to cover today are these sort of 5 areas. The first one is development of behavior. So what do we think actually contributes to our pet's behavior, and how does behavior even develop? The second aspect, which I personally feel is really, really important, is to have a look at canine communication. So how do our dogs actually communicate with us, and how do we know how they're feeling in any given moment, any given situation, any given day? We'll then have a look at some tips and tricks on introducing a new dog to the home and what we perhaps need to consider before we do that. And then obviously we'll have a look at the going back to work topic, which I think is, very topical at the moment in light of the COVID-19 situation. So what do we need to look out for when we change back to our sort of previous routines and we start going back to work more? And then finally, I want to have a look at some practical advice on what we can do to help dogs that are anxious, and introduce some great products and things that we can use to help these anxious pooches. Okay, so let's start with kind of the first thing. So what contributes to canine behavior? So how is canine behavior formed, and what influences how our dogs behave? And we think of that as really 3 main areas. The first one being genetics and epigenetics. We'll have a look at that in a bit more detail. So what's the DNA of our dogs contribute to behavior? The second part is learning. And very importantly, we're going to have a special focus on the socialization period, which is a very critical period in a puppy's life. And then finally, the environment. So how does the environment, where a dog lives, how a dog lives, what kind of triggers and stimuli are in the environment, how is that going to influence behavior? Okay, so if we look at the first of those three, genetics and epigenetics. So as I mentioned, this is basically your dog's DNA. What does your dog bring with it? What does it bring with it from its parents, its grandparents, and selective breeding, over decades? And the first thing would be just that. So some dogs have been selectively bred for certain tasks, for certain jobs. If we think about Labrador retrievers, golden retrievers, they've been bred to retrieve, so to put things into their mouths and bring them back. German Shepherd dogs, Malinois, have been bred to protect and to guard. Collies have been bred to herd. And so we can already sort of start to get a bit of an idea that different breeds of dogs may have different behavioral traits that they already bring with them genetically. And if you have a look at the two sort of dogs on the picture, we can probably think that a German Shepherd dog may bring it with it different behaviors than a Pomeranian. Having said that, though, even though we have sort of breed typical behaviors, there is always individual variation. So, perhaps the last Jack Russell Terrier that you had behaved very differently from your new Jack Russell Terrier. And even though they're both Jack Russell Terriers, individual variation means that both of them have a different set of behaviors, or just have different personalities, if you like. And then we think about the maternal influences. And this is a really kind of important topic, and it's what we refer to as epigenetics. So how important are the mother's influences, and how important is what the mother experiences while she's pregnant with the puppy? How important is that on the puppy's development and behavior as it grows into an adult? And we know, for example, that bitches that are pregnant with puppies and that perhaps are themselves living through a stressful time, let's say they're living on a construction site, they're not being fed well, they're not being fed the right things, they're perhaps not living a particularly stress-free lifestyle. Well, the stress that the mother experiences in that time can actually be transferred to the puppy whilst the puppy is in the mother's uterus. So we have certain hormones that circulate and that are released as a result of stress, a very important one being cortisol, and high cortisol levels in the pregnant mother dog can predispose the puppies to a different emotional resilience once they're born. Also things like, is a puppy lying next to two male puppies in the uterus, a female and a male, or two female puppies? Those can also be really predictive for future behavior. And that's usually due to, again, hormonal influences, but more the hormones like testosterone. So if you have a lot of male puppies in the uterus, there may be more testosterone floating around than if you had a lot of female puppies, and that might influence behavior going forwards. So there's a lot that's already brought with the dog once he's born, or even before he's born. So those are things that are really important to remember. I just want to touch on the developmental stages. So really importantly, we're going to start with the socialization period. So that's the third sort of developmental stage down, which is a period from about 3 weeks of age to about 16. So roughly the first 4 months of a puppy's life. And we're going to have a look at it in a little bit more detail. But basically, puppies go through developmental stages just like human children would. And the socialization period is a really important period in that sort of development of the puppy. After that, we've got more stages. We call them kind of ages and stages. So sexual maturity is a really important developmental period. And this is between around 6 and 9 months of age, depending on the individual, sometimes depending on the breed. So that's when you get more influences from hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. That's when we kind of get into that period of adolescence where, especially in male dogs, testosterone has a really big impact on behavior. And then finally, we have a period called social maturity, which is from around 18 months of age till about 2 to 3 years of age, and again can be very individually different. And that's where you really have the maturing of the psychological system and the neurological system, and that's basically comparative to, you know, a person going from puberty through adolescence into young adulthood, and that sort of happens with our dogs in the first 3 years of their life. And interestingly, a lot of behavior problems we do see in that first 2 to 3 years of life, where dogs go through these huge kind of still developmental stages, hormonal influences and all that sort of thing. So the majority of behavior problems, when they pop up, will occur in that sort of period of time, up to about 2 to 3 years of age. Okay, so that's a little bit about genetics and epigenetics. The second thing that we want to look at is learning, and how important learning is for the development of canine behavior. And I want to go back again to this sensitive period, or socialization period, or golden period as it's sometimes called, from about 3 weeks of age to 16 weeks of age. So a puppy's experiences in these first 4 months of age can be massively predictive on future behavior. And we know that, for example, experiences with different types of people, different animals, other dogs, you know, household appliances, vacuum cleaners, hair dryers, the experience that a puppy has in those first 4 months of age can be really important to how it feels about those things going forward. You can see the picture in the top right hand corner there. This is my mentor, Dr. DePorter's little Labrador puppy, Lance. And so there's a number that's kind of banded around a little bit. I don't think there's any scientific evidence for it, but we think that puppies should be exposed to at least 200 different types of people in that socialization period. And these will be people that, you know, are children, perhaps elderly people, wearing uniforms, different ethnicities, so that dogs get to be okay with different types of silhouettes and different types of people. And this is going to be important to how they feel about people moving forwards in their lives. Similarly, if a dog has a bad experience in that socialization period, so if it has a bad experience with a person, if it has bad experiences with other dogs, or if it has bad experiences with perhaps other types of animals, cats maybe in the household, that can also be predictive, and may teach the dog, you know, that those are things that they perhaps need to be worried about going forward. And then the other thing is a lack of experience. So if a dog isn't socialized to people, other animals, other dogs, that can also be a problem. So we start to kind of understand how really important this period of time is. And I think, you know, one of the things that we see here a lot in the UAE, you know, through nobody's fault, is that a lot of dogs go through quite a lot of stuff in these first 4 months of life. You know, they may be rescued, they may go to their first temporary home, they may go to their second temporary home, they may go to a third temporary home before they finally get to their sort of final home. And a lot of that will happen in this really critical socialization period. So I think if we can perhaps, you know, be a little bit more mindful of that period and really kind of take care of what the puppies need in that time, we might be able to set them up for success slightly better further down the line. So obviously, learning does not just occur in the socialization period. Learning occurs all the time. So absolutely, dogs can still learn good things, bad things after the age of 4 months. However, learning is accelerated in that first 4 month period. So it's like us learning a foreign language when we're 4 years old as opposed to when we're 40. So the learning just looks slightly different. But learning occurs all the time. So if you take your dog for a walk and your dog has a couple of unpleasant encounters with other dogs, he's going to learn from that experience. If your dog goes to a veterinary clinic and has an unpleasant experience, he's going to learn from that experience. If he goes to a veterinary clinic and has a great experience, he's going to learn from that as well. So learning happens all the time. So we need to be really mindful of what we expose our dogs to and what they may learn from those situations. And then the final thing I just want to touch on in the whole sort of learning block is the one event learning. So sometimes events can be so eventful or so important in a dog's life that they may generalize from that one event. So for example, if your dog goes to the veterinary clinic and he's lifted up onto an examination table and he has a number of unpleasant things done to him. So perhaps, you know, we take his temperature, he's given an injection, he's perhaps restrained forcefully and is not allowed to sort of move around as he would like to. He might take sort of a negative learning experience from that. And if that negative learning experience is traumatic enough, he may generalize that to other events where he might be popped up on a table at the groomers, for example, and he may learn that being up on a table and having things done to him is potentially a scary situation. So again, it's important to really sort of think about what are the events that we expose our dogs to, what may they learn from them, and what does that maybe mean for the future. Okay, and then the third sort of big thing in the contributing to the formation of behavior is the environment. So we need to think about social stresses, and social stresses could be other dogs already existing in the home, other dogs that perhaps a dog meets out on a walk, could be, you know, children, other pets in the environment, if a dog comes into a household with already existing cats, or if a dog comes into an environment where a new baby joins the family. Those are all social stresses that a dog has to kind of navigate. So those can definitely influence behavior. Stimuli and triggers, so that's a big one. So here in Abu Dhabi, we have this beautiful area called Al Raha Beach, where we have a number of wonderful apartment complexes with a lovely promenade, you know, and there are lots of people that own dogs in this area. For some dogs, it's absolutely great. You know, some dogs really enjoy that kind of environment. For some dogs, this environment is massively stressful because as soon as they leave their apartment, they may be faced with narrow corridors, not knowing exactly what they're going to encounter in those narrow corridors, having to get into elevators, not knowing what they're going to encounter once they get in the elevator, once they get out of the elevator, and then coming out sort of into that kind of, I guess, quite urbanized sort of social environment where there might be lots of other dogs, lots of people, kids running around, kids on skateboards, kids on bikes, all that kind of thing, which, as I mentioned, to some dogs may be okay, but some dogs might be really sort of offended by that or might find that very stressful, especially if they've had a lacking socialization period where they haven't had the opportunity to come into contact with all of those things. So we need to think a little bit about the environment. You know, is it urban? Is it a single house with lots of green fields around it? That's going to play a part as well. And then we need to think about, you know, how the environment influences meeting that dog's needs. So again, if you have a large dog that's very active, but you don't have great access to somewhere where that dog can run and have its physical needs met, that might contribute to behavior. So thinking about the environment is really important. All right, we're going to change gears a little bit and we are going to move into canine communication. And this for me is probably one of the most important things that we can talk about, because unfortunately our dogs can't speak to us, but they can communicate with us. And they have body language, they have facial expressions, and they have some vocalizations that they can use to communicate with us. The only thing is we have to get good at reading that communication. So we have to be able to know what the different types of body language and facial signals actually mean to be able to know how our dog feels. And I think, you know, that's one of the things that I always want to know about my own dogs is how are they feeling in a given moment? You know, are they feeling anxious that day? Are they worried about something? Are they worried about the cleaner coming in, for example? So I want to be able to read their body language to understand how they're feeling so that I can do something about it, that I can change the environment, that I can perhaps change my own behavior if necessary. And I want to introduce you here to these two images on the screen. So the one on the ladder of aggression ladder, it came out in 2004. So it's been around for about 16 years. And while I don't love the term aggression ladder, I think it does very nicely depict sort of how a dog's emotions can kind of rise when it's faced with stressors or threats or stimuli it feels uncomfortable with. On the right-hand side, you see something that's quite similar. This is from Fear Free. It's called the spectrum of fear, anxiety, and stress. And again, it moves sort of through these traffic light colors to kind of depict how a dog's emotional state might change as it goes through those sort of emotional states. And we've chosen the traffic light system. We've actually stolen it from pediatric psychiatry. So anywhere where you have non-verbal communicators, but you still really want to understand emotional state, you know, we found that this traffic light system has come in very helpful. So at the bottom is green. That's where we would like our dogs to spend most of their lives. It's where they, you know, they're relaxed, they're calm, they sleep a lot, they can think well, they can learn well, they can make good decisions. But as stressors rise in our dogs' lives, or as perhaps threatening stimuli rise or increase in our dogs' lives, we may see them moving up through this traffic light system from green to yellow to orange and then through to red. And I think, you know, that's something that we really need to sort of start looking at, is that we start to associate outwardly behavior with inwardly emotional state. And we're going to have a look at sort of some of the body language signals in these different colors going forwards. I think one other thing that I just want to mention is that, you know, this is a continuum. It's not that your dog is either in green or it's in red. It may be that it fluctuates and flows throughout the day, depending on what's happening in a day, in a situation, in its life in general. All right, so we're going to start having a look at green. So these may be some very early signals of stress. So you might see your dog yawning, you might see your dog blinking its eyes, you might see this tongue flick that you can see on the two pictures on the right there. You might see your dog turning its head away, as you can see on the two pictures on the left. You may see some panting, you may see some pacing. So these are all relatively mild signals, but if we miss them, we miss the earliest signs that your dog is communicating to you that he perhaps doesn't feel quite comfortable. And that means that if we don't do anything about it, your dog may feel the need to escalate its behaviors to communicate to us that he's not feeling great. And so as we start to rise up, we start to get a few more sort of significant body language signs. So you see dogs might turn their body away. They may start to paw. You can see this whale eye, which is really nice in the two pictures on the right there. It's also called a crescent moon eye, which is basically where you can see the whites of the dog's eyes. So they're kind of keeping their head still, but their eyes are moving. So you see more of the white part of the eye. That's a really classic one. You may see tight cheeks, so almost dogs with their little cheeks sucked in, and on the bottom right hand dog there you can see the little whiskers starting to puff out, so you can see the black dots on the whiskers, so you've got some muscular tension in the face there. And sometimes you can see a furrowed brow or a frown, so the black Labrador cross on the top right corner there, you can almost see like an indentation on his brow in between his eyes there. And so these are all signs of tension, muscles tightening, and the dog starting to get increasingly worried. And then we start to see perhaps some flight type behaviors. So the dogs are trying to get away. They may crouch lower to the ground. Their body weight may shift to the outside. So the leg that they're going to use to kind of escape on, you may see them kind of creeping or walking in slow motion. The ears may start to become flattened to the head, like in this little Chihuahua on the left. Again, the raised paw is quite a typical sign. Dilated pupils, large eyes, again, that's that sort of facial muscular tension. So all these body language signals are associated with rising stress, rising anxiety. And then you may see this picture, dog with a tail tucked really firmly between its back legs. The little dog on the left here, the tail's almost touching his belly. His ears are far back. You can see the whites of his eyes. And you can almost see, so the back legs are kind of a widened stance and very stiff. And you can almost see the body weight sort of shifting backwards a little bit there. And same with the little dog on the right, the tucked tail, those very sort of stiff, straight back legs, the ears are down. So this to me looks like a dog that's really quite scared. And then we start to see the behaviors that shift from flight, so trying to get away from the threat, trying to get away from the stressful situation, and particular if dogs aren't able to do that. So let's say, for example, they're being restrained physically by a person, or they're on a leash, or they're being cornered, or they're being held down on a veterinary examination table, all of a sudden that option of flight is taken away. And that's when we start to see the behaviors of fight coming through. So here you see kind of the stiffening up, the staring. All of a sudden the head's not turned away any longer. It starts to become central and focused on you. You may start to see body weight shifting towards rather than away from. And then we kind of go up into the realms of the red behaviors, as I would call them. So that's when we then see your overt, aggressive body language signals. So that would be a growl, perhaps a snarl, like this little dog on the left here. Then maybe showing of the teeth. So the dog is showing you its weapons, some vocalization in form of a snarl. And that's when you may get the bite. And often this is in times where the other options are removed from the dog, but sometimes this can also turn into a learned behavior. And I just want to spend a couple of moments here talking about the growl, because the growl to me is that really important communication signal that sits right at the interface between the flight behaviors and the fight behaviors. So the growl is that communication signal that says, I'm really not happy. I really feel bad in this situation. And if something doesn't change sometime soon, I'm going to have to do something about it. And unfortunately, if we punish a dog for growling, we're basically inhibiting that behavior, or we're teaching them that, you know, something bad's going to happen if they show that behavior. And then what might happen is you might have, the dog might skip straight to the snapping, snarling, biting. So it might kind of jump over that rung of the ladder, not give you the growl anymore, and go straight to the sort of overt aggressive behaviors that might include a bite, which is what we want to avoid at all costs. So if there's one thing I could say is please, please, please never punish your dog for growling. I know that, you know, that's sometimes harder, easier said than done, because, you know, in that moment, your own emotions might be up and, you know, you might be thinking, gosh, why is my dog growling at me? But actually he's trying to communicate to you just how uneasy and unwell he's feeling in that situation. And if we punish him for that, we're taking away a really important safety communication tool there. I also want to say that anxiety is not a bad thing. Fear and anxiety are normal emotions. We have to have fear and anxiety. We need to be able to respond to fear and anxiety, to keep ourselves safe. And it's the same for our dogs. So if a saber-toothed tiger walked into our living room, all of us would go into fight or flight mode, right? Our bodies would get ready either to flee or to fight. You know, all those stress systems, those physiological stress systems would kick into place. And so we need to have the fear response and the stress response in order to survive and in order to stay safe. But I think what we're always looking at is how appropriate are these fear responses, and, you know, how frequently do they occur? And I think that's what I always look at when I'm looking at my behavior patients is, you know, is this an appropriate response? Is it absolutely okay for this dog to react in this way for a short moment and then return back to baseline? Or is this, if this dog is growling, barking and lunging at another dog that's 100 meters away in the distance that it can't even see properly, is that then an appropriate response? And I think that's how we have to sort of start thinking about things is how normal are they, or how pathological are they, and how inappropriate for the given context, the given situation, is this arousal level? You know, and I sometimes see dogs in my behavior consultation room. So we have, usually the consultation lasts for about 2 hours. We've got calming music playing. You know, we're not touching the dog. The dog is allowed to do whatever he wants. We're throwing really high value treats to the dog, but still they're unable to come away from this very heightened, emotional, reactive, anxious state. And that's then where I start to think, hang on a minute, that's no longer an appropriate response. There's something going on here. Okay, and then I just want to talk a little bit about the 4 Fs. So we've talked about the 2 kind of typical Fs flight or fight. So we've just spoken about those. So a dog would probably choose to flee a lot of the time from situations that he finds threatening or stressful. If he's not able to do that for whatever reason, he may choose to fight. The other F that we see quite a lot of is this freeze response. So that moment of stillness, that kind of maybe crouching, very slow movement, moving away from something. And that's almost a moment of evaluation and a moment of stillness where the dog is kind of thinking about what his next chess moves needs to be in order to keep himself safe. And we do see these freeze responses in the veterinary clinic quite often. So that might be the dog that's frozen on the examination table or the cat that's frozen on the examination table. And it's very easy to misinterpret that and think, oh my God, they're being so good. You know, they're holding still, everything's fine. But actually what we need to be thinking is, how's that animal feeling at the moment? Because he's probably feeling just as scared and just as threatened as if he were displaying any of the other behaviors. So freeze is a really important one to notice. And then we have this group of behaviors which we call fiddle behaviors or flirt behaviors. And they are really normal canine behaviors, but taken out of context. So for example, licking your lips if there's no food around, scratching if you don't have a physiological itch, yawning if you're not tired, mounting another dog when it's not in a sexual context, shaking your whole body off even though you're not wet. So all of these behaviors would be normal dog behaviors in some contexts, but if they're exhibited in a stressful situation or a situation where there's a threat present, then these might be abnormal behaviors, or these might be behaviors that are associated with anxiety. And it's always really important to look at the context. So if your dog wakes up first thing in the morning and yawns, that's because he's just woken up and he's yawning. But if he's in the veterinary clinic and he yawns and yawns, or if you've taken him to the dog park and there are a lot of dogs around and you notice him yawning frequently, then that's a sign that he's perhaps not feeling quite so comfortable about something. And then one of the other behaviors that I just want to touch on, because it's an interesting one and it's sometimes misinterpreted, is this kind of flirt behavior. So that might be the dog that's kind of, you know, wagging its tail very kind of quickly and stiffly and zooming around to all the different people in the room, and might jump up on one and then zoom to the other one and jump up on the other one. And that can easily be seen as, oh my goodness, look how happy he is, look how friendly he is. But actually that dog may be anxious, and what he's doing is he's zooming around from one person to another trying to get information. So the jumping up and smelling around the face area or licking people is often a way to get information. So dogs get information mainly through their noses, and this oftentimes is, you know, a way of getting information of you know, what's happening in this situation. Do I need to be worried? Am I safe? And so often that dog that's darting around all over the place, you know, seemingly being friendly, can actually sometimes be quite an anxious doggy. So that's something to just consider. Okay, so I mean, we could spend hours talking about canine communication, you know, maybe that's a webinar on its own at some point. And there are a million more things to kind of talk about, but I hope I've given you a little bit of an introduction into the things to look out for, you know, when you're observing your dogs and when you're looking at their body language and their facial expressions. Okay, so let's move on to, what do we need to think about if we're introducing a dog to a new home? Now, this might be a dog that's coming into a home where there are no other dogs existing. This might be a dog coming into a foster environment. This might be a dog coming into a family of already existing dogs. So, you know, what are the things that we want to think about? And this is where I always think we probably need to just go back, you know, maybe one or two steps. And really have a think about these things. And sometimes these decisions are made very much based on emotion. You know, a lot of us fall in love with the romance of having a dog, and that's absolutely how it should be. You know, that's dogs hugely enrich our lives, but we probably need to just take a step back and think logically and think about what kind of dog, you know, would practically fit into our lives. And so we go back to the things that we've already discussed. So genetics, learning, environment, you know, what kind of breed is this dog going to be? You know, can we if we're going to get a German Shepherd, for example, you know, can we provide what that dog needs? And, you know, are we ready and prepared for the behaviors that that dog might bring with it? If we get a golden retriever or a Labrador retriever, that dog's going to be putting a lot of things in its mouth. So is it going to be okay for that dog to destroy the odd flip flop, or are we prepared to move those things kind of out of the dog's reach initially? What did that dog's socialization period look like? Do we know? Do we even know? Sometimes we don't. With a lot of the rescue dogs here, unfortunately, we don't know what the first 4 months of that dog's life looked like. And if we do know, is that going to be the right dog for us? You know, did the dog come into contact with young children, for example, during the socialization period? And do we have young children in our homes? So these are things that we really need to be thinking about. And also, what kind of environment are we going to be able to provide? You know, if we have a large dog, do we have some outside space? If we only have an apartment, might it be better to look at a smaller dog, for example? The social setup. Are we thinking of starting a family, and what does that mean for our choice of dog? Do we already have children, young children in the home? And, you know, do we perhaps need to think about getting a dog that's been abandoned and has maybe been used to living with children? Do we have 6 cats? And, you know, what does that mean for the dog that we're going to bring into our home? We need to know a little bit about, is this dog going to be okay with 6 cats? Are the 6 cats going to be okay with the dog? So all of those things need to be considerations, both in a foster setting as well as in a sort of a permanent adoption type of setting. We've spoken about breed, we've spoken about size, age. You know, might it be better to foster or adopt an older dog, a senior dog, that doesn't perhaps need as much exercise, and we can provide a really great environment for it, you know, for however many years it has left. The gender status, I think the neuter status is really important. If we have an entire female already existing in our household, probably bringing an entire male into that house is going to be a bit of a recipe for disaster. So all of these things really deserve a lot of consideration. What's the previous experience of the dog been, but also what's our previous experience been as dog owners? You know, what kind of breeds do we know well? What kind of breeds do we have experience with? And are they going to be appropriate for our life at this moment? And then I think we need to definitely consider, you know, taking on a puppy is going to be a 10, 15-year commitment. And are we prepared to take on the responsibility for that animal for that period of time? And everything that comes with that: costs, veterinary care. Doesn't even have to be an animal that gets sick or has an accident, just the routine veterinary care. You know, we need to be prepared for that. And what happens if we have to leave the country? And, you know, I think if COVID-19's taught us anything, is that things can change in a heartbeat. So what would happen if you would have to quickly leave the country? Do you have provisions in place to take that dog with you? So those are all things that I think are really, really important to consider. And when we move on to sort of the final part, you know, what can we do? I'll be able to address a lot more, you know, what can we do when we do bring a new dog into our home? What are the practical, strategic things that we can do to make the transition a little bit easier? Okay, but I do want to spend some time talking about this, because this has been a topic that I think, you know, certainly I've received a lot of questions about. I know my colleagues have received a lot of questions about, and it's the whole question of separation anxiety. And, you know, is this going to be a problem when we start to go back to work? You know, perhaps some of us have been at home with our dogs for 3-4 months now, and what might be the implications of that routine changing again and us going back to work? Now, here's the thing. We do not know exactly what causes separation anxiety and why one pet may be more predisposed or more affected than another. We think it's probably a combination of factors, and we think it probably goes back to our 3 building blocks, which is genetics, learning, and environment. So we do presume that there is probably a genetic factor involved, but we also presume that learning plays a role, so that, you know, if a dog learns that if he's been left alone, bad things have happened, or hasn't felt happy or comfortable, then that's, you know, possibly something that they may learn. And this sometimes can happen, you know, when you bring a new puppy home and you kind of keep it isolated or crated downstairs during the night. Puppies and the puppy feels naturally kind of scared or anxious or worried it's just been separated from its mum and its siblings, that's a learning factor, or that's a contributing factor that can be learnt and may predispose to separation anxiety. And how has this whole COVID-19 period affected the development of separation anxiety? We probably think that most dogs are capable of developing separation anxiety. And it may be those dogs that are perhaps predisposed to anxiety anyway. But for sure, COVID-19 could have an impact. The dog's with you all day, and all of a sudden it's being left alone again, perhaps for many hours of the day. So for sure that can play a part. Now, how do you know if your dog has separation anxiety, or what should you do if you suspect separation anxiety? Well, let's look at what separation anxiety actually is. So it usually develops before the age of 3 years, but as we've just kind of heard, it could develop at any point. And it's usually in response to the separation from a key person or key people. So it's often a dog that's left completely home alone, but it may also be a dog where perhaps the husband and the children are at home, but mum leaves, and because mum is the dog's key person, that he could still have separation anxiety to mum leaving, even if there are still other people in the house. It can also be if the dog is separated in another room. So everybody's still at home, but mum's gone to have a lovely long bath without the dog, closes the door, and the dog is then kind of lying outside the bathroom door, might be whining, might be crying, might be scratching at the door. So there could be what we call virtual separation anxiety, even if everyone's at home, but the dog is just separated in a different space or in a different room. It may occur if the dog is separated from other dogs or from other animals. It doesn't happen as frequently. It does tend to be people most of the time, but separation can occur as a result of the separation from another animal. We see separation anxiety mainly in dogs, but we also see it in cats, and we also see it in birds. So that's something else to consider as well if you have cats or if you have other pets. And separation anxiety is mainly characterized by these 4 behaviors. Vocalization, so that can be anything from crying and whining through to howling and barking for hours and howling for hours. It can be destruction, and again, that can be as little as eating a flip-flop or overturning food bowls and water bowls, but can move right through to chewing through doors, chewing through door frames, chewing through window panes, tearing the wallpaper off the walls, as you can see here. So the destruction can be quite significant. It can be pacing, so pacing up and down in front of the door. It can be drooling sometimes, so that hypersalivation due to pacing and panting. And then urination and defecation, that's the kind of the 4th element. And most of these behaviors you'll probably know about. So vocalization, your neighbors might tell you, hey, your dog was barking for hours and hours, or he was crying when you left. The destruction you'll definitely know about when you come home. The drooling you may know about if you see, big puddles of saliva when you come home. And urination and defecation you probably also will know about. The one thing that's harder, I think, to determine is that kind of pacing behavior. And sometimes those are the dogs where separation anxiety goes undetected because all they do is pace up and down, but they may still be feeling that same amount of anxiety. So what to do if you suspect your dog has separation anxiety? Well, I would most definitely recommend, the first thing I would do is to set up a phone, an iPad, a camera, something, at the front door or the place of departure, and record your dog and see what he does. Now, separation anxiety is usually classified for those behaviors occurring in the first 20 minutes after your dog is left alone or is separated. So you really only need to record the first 20 minutes, but sometimes it can be very telling, to record the entire separation episode. Now, I will warn you that sometimes that can be hugely distressing to watch. I've had a lot of people, you know, come to me in tears because they've recorded what their dog does when they leave. And it's been so distressing to watch them because they get themselves worked up in such a terrible frenzy. You can also watch for pre-departure signs. So what does your dog do if you put on your makeup, you use the hairdryer, you pick up your keys, you put on your shoes, you spritz the perfume or the cologne? Does he start to watch you more intently? Does he start to pant and pace if he picks up on those pre-departure signs? So that could be a sign that your dog might suffer from separation anxiety. And then you definitely need to set up the video and record the 20 minutes after separation. If you have any suspicion at all that your dog may be suffering from separation anxiety, please, please, please seek treatment immediately from a veterinary behaviorist, because this is a true panic and distress behavior. And, you know, we would liken that to a dog having a panic attack at the moment of departure. So please seek help immediately. It's really quite a serious condition. Never punish your pet if you come home to destruction or elimination. And again, I know that's easier said than done, but you know, your dog is not behaving this way because he's being bad. He's behaving this way because he's truly anxious and distressed. So punishment is not going to affect anything. It's not going to make things better. In fact, it'll probably make things worse, because you're going to increase your dog's anxiety level by punishing him. And if possible, whilst you're, you know, seeking for help, setting up a behavioral appointment, if possible, try not to leave your pet alone, because each experience of departure it has may make the behavior worse. Again, that might not always be practically possible, but that's why please seek professional help as soon as you can. Okay, so now we move on to our last part, which is what can we do? How can we help dogs that have anxiety, or how can we help dogs that behave in ways that, you know, that are perhaps inappropriate or unwanted, or that signify that they might not be entirely emotionally healthy? And I think the first thing is we need to recognize the signs. So we have to be better at canine body language and at reading canine communication. And we have to recognize the signs, and we have to be empathetic to them. So we have to understand that these animals aren't behaving in a certain way because, you know, they're bad dogs or they're nasty or anything like that. It's because they're acting out their emotional state. And then I think, you know, definitely, as I've just mentioned, seek the help of a qualified professional, get a diagnosis, set up a treatment plan. This might be a trainer. You know, I think choose carefully who you would allow to treat your dog. So this might be a great trainer, positive reinforcement based trainer. It might be a veterinary behaviorist. It might be your veterinarian, and your veterinarian might be able to refer you on to a veterinary behaviorist. So I think, you know, those things are really important to consider. And as I've just said, please don't punish your dog. It'll make things worse. It'll increase the risk for aggressive behaviors, and it probably won't work. Or if it does work, it will only work for a short time, but it won't help to address the core problems that your dog has. So please don't punish them. Create an appropriate and safe environment where possible. Again, we've spoken so much about the environment. And again, you know, this is where we really need to think about what environment is going to be appropriate for what dog. And if we know that we're welcoming a dog into our home that might have anxiety problems, you know, then we want to create as calm an environment as possible. And I've got some more sort of tips for that. And when we're looking to place a foster dog, you know, maybe an anxious dog is not best placed with a family that's really busy and has lots of young children where there's lots going on. So I think we need to be more strategic, and we really need to think more about the dog's emotional needs in that moment. Okay, we've also got some great products that can help us. This is one of my favorites. So this is a pheromone product. And so basically the mother dog, when she's nursing her puppies, she produces a pheromone in her mammary region. And this pheromone signals to the puppies, you're safe, you don't need to worry about anything, you can be calm, I'm going to protect you. And so there is a synthetic version of exactly this pheromone, and it comes in a product called Adaptil, which is kind of the original product, I guess, the original pheromone product, and also comes as a product called Canny Comfort, which is made by the company BFR, and that is available here in the UAE. All of the products come either as a plug-in diffuser, they come as a collar that can be worn around the dog's neck, and they also come as a spray that can be used strategically. I often like to use the spray in a food puzzle maze and then let the dog snuffle around in the food puzzle maze so that it can inhale the pheromones. So the dog has to inhale the pheromones in order for them to work. The spray I really love because you can use it before you take your dog out for a walk, before you have friends around, before your kids have friends around. So you can really use it in a strategic way. But the diffuser and the collars are also great because you kind of get continued exposure to the pheromones. So that's something I would advise for any dog coming into a new home. Plug in a diffuser, get a collar. And that's going to be good for the dogs already in the home, if that's the case, and the dog coming into the home. So those are all great things, that we can do to help out. Thunder shirts. So some of you may have heard of Thunder shirts. So these are basically a shirt that a dog wears, as depicted here on the photograph, and they work as a pressure wrap. So they create pressure on the tissues. And is kind of similar to sort of a swaddle wrap in babies, or receiving a hug, or kind of being enveloped in a very sort of safe way. And there has been some research done on Thunder shirts. I think they work extremely well for some dogs, perhaps not quite so well for others. And the research does show that Thunder shirts are effective to reduce anxiety, but usually only in combination with sort of a holistic treatment plan. So is a Thunder shirt on its own going to be effective in a severe case of separation anxiety? Probably not. Is it going to help a dog in some situations, maybe going out for a walk or maybe coming to a veterinary clinic? Yeah, maybe. But I think it's to be seen in the context of sort of a holistic treatment plan. We also have these great products. Now, the reason I've kind of depicted Zylkene and the Royal Canin Calm Food together is because they both have the same active ingredient. And the active ingredient is called alpha-casozepine. It's a milk protein, so it's completely natural. It's not a drug or a medication in any way. But the milk protein has been shaped in a certain way that it actually binds to receptors in the brain that promote calm behaviors. And so Zylkene comes as a capsule that you can sprinkle over your dog's food. It's highly palatable. Usually dogs really enjoy eating it. Comes in 3 different sizes for small, medium, and large dogs, and can be given on a daily basis. So again, this is something that you might want to consider if you're bringing a new dog into a home. Start them on Zylkene a couple of weeks prior to introducing them into the new home. I've seen the best results with Zylkene when it's been given for a prolonged period of time. So, at least a month, maybe 2, 3, 4, maybe even longer than that. So it's kind of an ongoing treatment. And that same alpha-casozepine molecule is also in the Royal Canin Calm Food. And the Royal Canin Calm Food has a second ingredient, which is L-tryptophan, which is the precursor for serotonin. Now, serotonin is a really important neurotransmitter in the brain and is really important in behavior. So the fact that, the diet contains the precursor that can then be transformed into serotonin is really great. So I think both of these products would be brilliant for any dog with anxiety, and also in these types of situations where we've got people going back to work or new dogs coming into a home. And then I have this little nugget to share, which is music. And again, there's been a lot of research done on calming music for dogs. So it's not just a kind of a frou-frou sort of frilly idea. It's actually has been research, and there's scientific data to kind of back it up. So research was conducted on different genres of music, whether that was classical or reggae or hip hop or rock or whatever. And classical music has been found to be the most calming, and is available. We in our clinic, I play through a dog's ear pretty much most of the time. I really enjoy that. I've seen great results with some dogs. Again, some dogs not necessarily all dogs, but some dogs respond amazingly to music. And it has a little bit of a dual effect. So number one, you have the calming music itself, so the music that calms, but also it helps to drown out some environmental noise. So if you've got a dog that's perhaps particularly sensitive to noises in the home, or perhaps noises outside of the home, if you live in an apartment, maybe, you know, the neighbors in the corridor, if your dog's very sensitive to that, playing the music will help to kind of drown out some of those noises. I've used white noise machines before as well. So the sound of the ocean or birds chirping, that also works well for some dogs. And you just need to experiment a little bit with which works best for your dogs. But again, leave it playing if you leave the house. Have it playing if you're introducing new dogs to the home. So all those things I think are really sort of useful. And then just before we finish, I want to leave you with a couple of resources. So this book, Decoding Your Dog, is a fantastic read. It's written for dog owners, and it was written by a group of diplomats, so specialists, veterinary behavior specialists from the American College of Veterinary Behaviorists. And if you're a dog owner, this is almost a must. It's such a great book. It's written in such an easy to read way. And it really gives us a great insight onto sort of our most recent knowledge in dog behavior. And then the other resource that I love is the Fear Free Happy Homes website. It's a website that you can join for free. It has a plethora of videos and articles and things you can watch and read on canine behavior. It's got some great resources for children. There are some really lovely videos. They're only about 5 minutes long, but they show how you can recognize canine body language, and it's in a really sort of child-friendly way, in a sort of a cartoony way that kids can really sort of recognize canine body language and canine facial expressions. And I play this to a lot of children during my consultations, and the remarks I've gotten back from kids, the level of understanding that they've gotten from those videos has been phenomenal. So I would recommend that to anybody. Okay, which brings me nearly to the end. So I just want to sum things up a little bit. Again, I'm going to keep harping on about it, but get really good at reading canine body language and emotional state, because that is going to enable you to do something about it. If you can't read it, you can't act upon it. So get really good at doing that. And I always say, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. If you get really good at reading this, you're going to pick this up in all the dogs that you ever encounter. Be aware of what a dog needs and be very mindful of this when you consider whether to bring a dog into your home. All the things that we've spoken about, but just be thoughtful about it, and perhaps choose a dog not because you're in love with a breed or you desperately want a young puppy. Choose a dog because it's going to fit in with your lifestyle. Understand that anxiety may be a medical condition that needs to be treated accordingly, and please seek professional help. A lot of these cases are real welfare issues and they need to be addressed by a professional. And then finally, be empathetic. Be empathetic to your dog's emotions, understand them, and please don't punish your dogs for feeling a certain way. They're not trying to be bad and they're not trying to annoy you. They're just expressing how they feel. And with that, I want to say thank you very much. These are pictures of my two lovely doggies. They're both UAE rescue dogs. Got Polly on the left-hand side and Lexi on the right-hand side. Lexi's a bit of a nervous girl at times, so she takes Zylkene when she's feeling a little bit unsure about life. And the two of them have taught me so much about canine behavior. And there's also my email address on the bottom of the page there. Please do get in touch. I offer veterinary behavior consultations. I offer them virtually as well. So even if you're based in Dubai, we can definitely do that. I've done many over the last few months with great success. So please feel free to get in touch with me if you need any help at all. And with that, I will hand back over to Hannah and the team, and happy to answer your questions.
Right, thank you so much, Dr. Catherine. That was fantastic. I think you've successfully debunked quite a few myths there, particularly with regards to canine communication. I think a big one for me was always the licking the lips and yawning. Once, as you say, once you've seen that in the waiting room at the vets, you're like, that makes a lot of sense. And then you see it everywhere and you realize, even when they don't outwardly appear so stressed, a lot of the dogs that we come into contact with are. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Now we do have a few questions that have come in, if you're happy to answer those, and I will dive right in, but please continue to comment if anybody wants to add their questions. We've plenty of time. So the first one is a good one, and it's, if you have or someone who has a new foster dog within their home and is finding that the dog is struggling when guests come to the house, behavior outside on the lead and behavior when socializing with other dogs outside of the home is not a problem, but guests coming into the house is causing vocalization and pacing and general signs of anxiety. What can they do to help?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, something that we see a lot. I think for me, safety has always got to be number one in those situations. So if you have somebody coming into your home, we saw from the ladder of aggression there how quickly those behaviors can actually escalate. So we want to make sure we keep everybody safe, and that's the people and the dog as well, because we don't want that dog to go to that place where he feels the need to act. So I would say if the dog would tolerate it, separating them somehow, whether that's in a separate room completely, or whether that's through a baby gate, or whether that's sort of security measures on a leash, that's a great first step. And if we can then also give the dog something that's going to be of high value, a great chew toy or a Kong that's stuffed with peanut butter and cheese and chicken and you name it, all those things will act, number one, as a distraction, and number two, will start to build that counter conditioning process of, oh my God, whenever we have visitors, something amazing happens. I get this amazing, treat filled Kong to chew on. So those are all things that can be done. Now, they might not be successful. There may be some dogs that are still so reactive and so worried that no matter, even if you give them a steak, they might not calm down. And that's that inappropriate reaction that I was talking about. That's when we start to think of that behavior as being a behavior problem. And that would be the point that I would probably say, get in touch with me or with another veterinary behaviorist.
Okay, that's very helpful. It's sort of on the same vein as another question that's come in here, but aggression in a different situation. So when the dog is on the lead and when they're out walking with their owner, when they're released from the lead, no problem. And socializing with people and dogs not attached is not a problem. I used to get this quite a bit described by clients, and it was definitely a behavior point that I struggled to know how to safely advise them on, because it can be difficult, can't it, to think it's okay to release them if they're showing sort of signs of aggression or vocalizing. You think that would be the last thing that you feel you can do, is safely release them from being on the lead.
Absolutely. And I think some of the behaviors on the leash may be due to that, kind of restricting their sort of natural communicative behavior, or, they don't have those flight options that they might do when they're off leash. So they would more readily resort to fight. It might be a learnt behavior that when they're on leash, they've learned to react a certain way, and that's made them feel better. I guess for me, always the question is, how much do you know about the dog that is on the other side? So that, you're releasing your dog off leash, and who is the other dog that your dog is going to come into contact with? And is there a potential that dog might really not know what to do, or might behave in a really detrimental way to your dog? I would probably say, so, and again, this is another thing about socialization. People seem to feel that they have to socialize their dogs. But as we learned, true socialization only happens in the socialization period, and anything after that is just interaction and conversation. If you can facilitate a really safe, positive social experience with another dog, maybe at somebody's house, in a safe space, in somebody's garden, and your dogs can play really nicely with each other, then that's great. But if you're not sure how the interaction with the other dog is going to go, then I would probably say turn around, walk away, move in a different direction if you can. Take your dog away from that situation. Because I wonder whether some of the problems that we encounter has been due to repeated negative learnt experiences with other dogs.
Do you therefore support, I've seen it definitely in the UK, the idea that you can get a colour coordinated lead for when you're walking in the park? So say a green lead would be happy to socialise, happy to meet other dogs. An amber lead would be just, you know, maybe take a step back and see how the owner responds. And of course a red lead, just keep your distance because this dog is not happy to socialise and it might push a situation beyond what anybody wants.
Absolutely. I think, you know, that's such a great system, and it would be just so amazing if we could implement that a little bit more here in the UAE. But I think not just for dog interactions, but also for dog human interactions. I have so many clients who have anxious dogs, and they tell me time and again, you know, they're walking their dog and somebody will come over and will demand almost to pet their dog, or will say, oh no, don't worry about it, you know, I'm really good with dogs, I've had dogs all my life. And actually that dog is feeling really anxious and invaded at that person coming over. So I think absolutely, you know, having that system in place and having more people be aware of that system, and have more people be aware of dog emotional state in general would really help us and a lot of the dogs.
Yeah, I agree. I have another question actually about the walking aspect. I've heard a few mentions that if your dog finds walking very stressful, you don't necessarily have to walk them every day. Would that be something that you agree with as a statement?
100%. I think if your dog finds the outside world really scary and worrying, why would you expose them to it? So it's like, you know, having a person who's afraid of snakes and you know, throwing them in a snake pit almost, you know, it's a little bit of a rough comparison. But if your dog finds the outside world really scary, if he hasn't been socialized to cars, people, noises, if there's a high level of triggers in that environment, you know, I mentioned that sort of Al Raha beach area where at certain times of the day there's just so much going on. Some dogs find that overwhelming. So you absolutely don't have to walk them. You can absolutely create a lot of mental and physical stimulation for them within the home, within the garden, you know, lots of scatter feeding, food puzzles, you know, doing some cool reinforcement training, wrapping a box within a box within a box and putting a treat on the inside and having them kind of dig that out. So all those things provide a lot of mental stimulation, whereas I think being outside on a walk may just provide mental arousal rather than positive stimulation.
If your dog doesn't like going for a walk though, would there be a way to try and develop that, as in by sort of going for a shorter walk and then trying to build on that? Then, you know, it's not a lost cause type situation. If they don't like it, we have to give up.
Absolutely. First of all, we have to get their brains into a healthy enough state that they can actually learn. So with a lot of these anxious dogs, we find that the neurochemical imbalances are so great that a lot of time we need to address that in order to get their brains into a healthier state so that they can actually learn new behaviors. And then, yeah, it's the classical counter conditioning and desensitization exercises where you literally take baby steps with lots and lots of treats to, you know, to provide positive experiences. And if you perhaps can't provide that in that given environment, then maybe, you know, you hop in the car and you drive somewhere that's quieter and you provide, you know, a really positive experience in a slightly quieter place at first. So it's all about kind of thinking outside the box and adapting to what your dog needs, if that's possible. I appreciate that that's not always possible, but that comes back to then, you know, was that the right choice of dog for that household?
Of course. And I've had another great question, which I used to see an awful lot in the clinic, is advice when you're dealing with your dog as they're getting older, and you know that we start to see signs of cognitive dysfunction and confusion, and when that translates to being potentially irritable around other members of the family or other pets, what sort of positive steps can we do to counteract that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do see, you know, cognitive decline or cognitive dysfunction syndrome, which is kind of the canine equivalent of dementia, I guess. So as dogs get older, you know, we start to see changes in the brain, degenerative changes in the brain, and we see sort of a regression almost a little bit. So some dogs that were previously perfectly house trained might no longer be, you know, they start to lose their puzzle solving abilities. So They might not remember where the food bowl was, or all those kinds of things. And, you know, it's great that you mentioned irritability, because that can be, yes, due to cognitive decline, but it could also be due to chronic pain. So we see a lot of dogs that as they get older, they have, you know, chronic osteoarthritis or other pain-related medical changes, and that can definitely be a cause for increased irritability, especially if you've got a young puppy that's trying to bounce all over the older dog. There are a number of things that can be done. There are some great diets that support cognitive function. There are some great supplements that support cognitive function. And there are also some great medications that support that as well. So there are definitely things that can be done, many things. And again, that would be a great behavior consultation.
I can imagine there's also things you can adapt in the environment as well if you're looking at a chronic pain, and potentially, I suppose, members of the family need to learn to adapt their behavior as well. It's not just changing the dog, but just changing the way you approach him, especially if eyesight's failing, I suppose, as well, and you're taking him more by surprise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, yeah, and lots of people build ramps, you know, if their dogs are less able to hop to the sofa, able to go upstairs to the back of the car, you know, building little steps and ramps and things like that to help them. So exactly what you mentioned, Hannah, to accommodate what they need now in their older years.
Oh, of course. Well, I think that's all we have time for now, Dr. Katrin. Any further questions we will answer as soon as we can and share on our social media. And we would like to say a big thank you to you, of course, for your time today. It's been fantastic. And also to all of our listeners and viewers on the YouTube channel. Please visit the YouTube channel, SV Animal Health. We've got lots of other webinars and information on there that you might find useful. But thank you very much for today, and also for learning that there has been research into the best soundtrack to keep dogs calm. I absolutely love that. What did they prefer? What's on Through the Dog's Ear? Is it classical? Is it reggae? Yeah. I'd really like it to be reggae.
Yeah, unfortunately it's classical, but they did some great studies about sort of heart rate variability with different genres of music and stuff. So it's interesting to read the research, but yeah, it's classical all the way, I'm afraid.
Oh, I'd like to have been part of that research, I must say. But thank you so much for your time today, and hopefully we will hear you on the radio very soon.
My pleasure. Thank you, Hannah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.